Saigon, April 30th, 1975. You have 72 hours to make one decision that will determine whether your family survives the next decade, or doesn't. Either you'll be crushed under communist rule, or you'll risk drowning in the South China Sea. Your neighbor, a doctor, 20 years of saving lives. Right now he's crouched over his kitchen table wrapping something in fabric, thin, barely visible, Kim Thon, gold leaves. He's converting his entire life savings, everything, into something the size of a deck of cards. Here's the math. The legitimate ferry to Malaysia, $10 per person. The smuggler's boat across open water, $1,000 per person. Your family of 4 needs $4,000 in cash, in a currency the smuggler will accept, in 48 hours. The doctor with the gold leaves, he's already boarding. The family with savings locked in a Saigon bank account, still waiting at home. 1.5 million Vietnamese fled across the South China Sea, using this exact protocol. This is not fiction. This is a documented survival strategy from one of the largest refugee crises of the 20th century. And what I'm about to tell you is something almost nobody is saying out loud. Gold is not for buying bread during a collapse. It's not for trading cigarettes at military checkpoints. It's for the moment when borders close, when institutions fail. And you need to move your family across an international boundary with your accumulated life savings intact. I'm going to show you exactly how this works. We'll perform an autopsy on history. We'll look at documented cases. We'll discuss the operational details most people completely miss. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this cycle repeats across every major collapse of the last 100 years. Same asset class, same outcome, same survivors. The autopsy is always the same, and the survivors always carried the same insurance policy. Let's get into it. The Vietnamese boat people developed one of the most sophisticated escape systems in modern history. And it was built around a single elegant financial instrument, Kim Thon. Extraordinarily thin sheets of pure gold, stacked, wrapped to minimize bulk. Here's the genius of it. A standard 1-ounce gold bar is worth roughly $4,300 at current prices. It weighs 31 grams. It's conspicuous, recognizable. Any border guard conducting a search instantly knows exactly what they're looking at and what it's worth. Gold leaves are different. A full stack could be compressed into a package no larger than a deck of playing cards, and when discovered during a cursory search, they could easily be misidentified as aluminum foil. Thin, dull metal strips with no obvious value to an official who doesn't know what they're looking at. The entire strategy was built on that recognition gap. A Vietnamese refugee family could carry thousands of dollars worth of gold in a package that weighed practically nothing and looked like nothing. When a guard finds a gold bar, that's immediate confiscation. But when they find something that looks like crumpled foil, they might wave you through. But here's the part that changes everything. These families didn't accumulate gold to spend during the crisis. They accumulated it to cross borders during the crisis and rebuild after it was over. This distinction matters more than anything else I'm going to say today. Most people get this completely backwards. They think precious metals are a crisis spending tool. They're not. They're a crisis transport vehicle. A way to move your life savings across a border when no other mechanism works. The Vietnamese refugee who arrived in Malaysia with gold leaves didn't spend them at a market stall for rice. They spent them years later to buy a house, to start a business, to fund an education. Gold doesn't get you through the collapse. Gold gets you to the other side of the collapse with something left. Vienna, 1938. You're a Jewish banker watching the Anschluss unfold. You have a certificate of deposit worth 50,000 Reichsmarks sitting in a bank. Your colleague has 3 diamonds sewn into the lining of his coat. I don't need to tell you which one of you makes it to Switzerland. This isn't speculation. The most extensively documented example of this dynamic is Oskar Schindler, who bribed SS officers with black market food, goods, and diamonds to secure the release of Jewish workers from concentration camps. These bribes worked because they represented real, tangible value that could be used without requiring institutional validation. An SS officer at a checkpoint in 1944 is not going to call a bank to verify the legitimacy of your certificate of deposit, but he will recognize a diamond. He will recognize gold. He understands instantly and instinctively what it's worth. And more importantly, that this value will persist regardless of whatever happens to the regime he's currently serving. That's the critical insight. Paper assets require institutional validation. A bank needs to be open, a government needs to be functioning. The legal system that created them needs to still be operational. Tangible assets, gold, silver, gemstones, require none of that. Their value comes from their physical properties, their elemental composition, their density and rarity. These things are recognized universally, across every culture, every regime, every century of human history. The cycle is identical across Vienna, 1938, Saigon, 1975, Beirut, 1982, Kabul, 2021. Same stages, same outcomes. When an institution becomes your enemy, assets that depend on that institution become worthless overnight. Let's look at the real cost of safe passage in modern conflict zones, because this is where everything becomes much more concrete. Syria, 2015 to 2016. 1 million Syrians reached Greece in 18 months. The pricing structure was remarkably consistent. Smugglers charged approximately €1,000 per person for a rubber dinghy crossing from Turkey to the Greek islands, a crossing that ferries made legally for €10, a 10,000% markup, converting a legal journey into an illegal operation managed by organized crime networks. A Syrian family of 4 needed €4,000, cash, in euros or US dollars, currencies the smugglers would actually accept, which meant first converting whatever Syrian pounds they had saved in the middle of a war on the black market at whatever exchange rate they could get. Families who couldn't complete that conversion in time couldn't escape the war. Ukraine, February 24, 2022. Russian tanks crossed the border at dawn. 50,000 people fled in the first 48 hours. Banks suspended electronic transfers within hours. ATMs across major cities were completely empty by noon. Think about what that means practically. You have $20,000 in your account. The number is right there on the screen, but you cannot access it. The infrastructure that gives that number meaning has stopped functioning. One Ukrainian refugee escaped with Bitcoin stored on a USB drive and a written seed phrase memorized. He converted a portion to cash by selling to people he knew personally and arrived in Poland with roughly $600. Bitcoin worked for exactly one documented refugee. And here's why it doesn't work at scale. Bitcoin requires internet connectivity to verify the blockchain, electricity to power your device, access to a functioning cryptocurrency exchange, and enough technical knowledge to implement digital security procedures under extreme stress. More importantly, that refugee didn't stay in Poland as a Bitcoin holder. He converted his crypto to fiat currency as rapidly as he possibly could. Even in the most favorable possible scenario for digital assets, a tech-savvy refugee from a country with active crypto infrastructure, digital assets are treated as an intermediate step, a bridge to get back to real money that can be spent on food, shelter, and safe passage. Gold requires none of what Bitcoin requires. No internet, no electricity, no exchange, no technical knowledge. A refugee with gold can cross into any country, wealthy or poor, sophisticated banking system, or informal cash markets only. And that gold will be recognized, valued, and exchangeable. Because gold has been recognized, valued, and exchangeable for 6,000 years. Venezuela, 2013 to 2018. This is the control case. The clearest example of what hyperinflation actually does to ordinary savings. The bolivar went from 6.3 per US dollar in 2013 to over 3,000 per dollar by 2016. Inflation hit 4,000% in 2017 alone. Your $10,000 equivalent in local currency savings dropped to $250 in purchasing power. Not because someone stole it, not because the bank failed, because the unit of value itself became worthless. Venezuelans who had accumulated savings in bolivars watched the collapse of their financial lives. Venezuelans who held gold saw their nominal bolivar values increase proportionally with inflation, and could trade gold on black markets for US dollars at rates reflecting actual international value. Gold holders didn't get rich, but they didn't lose everything. In a hyperinflation scenario, not losing everything is the win. If If any of this is landing differently than you expected, if you're realizing the framework you've been using to think about financial security has a structural gap in it, hit subscribe. This channel is dedicated to forensic financial history. I study what actually happened to wealth during institutional collapse, and I tell you what these cycles are before they repeat in your lifetime. Drop a plane emoji in the comments if you're already positioning for what's coming, and tell me what you want me to examine in the next video. I read every single comment. Someone said it perfectly after the last video. Gold isn't for getting you through the collapse. It's for setting you up on the other side. Exactly right. Let's keep going. Okay. You've made it across. You're in a safe country. Your gold leaves are intact, so now what? Because this is where most people's exit protocol completely falls apart. Let's talk about what the law actually says, because the gap between what people assume and what the law actually requires will determine whether you arrive with your savings or whether the customs agency keeps them. Under the Bank Secrecy Act in the United States, anyone entering or leaving with more than $10,000 in cash must file FinCEN Form 105. Here's the legal distinction that matters. Physical gold, bullion, bars, coins, is not classified as currency or monetary instruments under the Bank Secrecy Act. Someone carrying $50,000 worth of gold bars across a U.S. border does not technically trigger the Form 105 currency reporting requirement. Someone carrying $10,001 in cash does. That sounds like good news. But it's not the whole picture. Gold is still subject to customs declaration obligations. And this is where it gets brutal. Even if you're not violating the Bank Secrecy Act, if you fail to accurately declare precious metals at customs, your gold is subject to seizure under civil asset forfeiture statutes, not a fine. Seizure. They take it. The procedural mechanics are deliberately difficult. When U.S. Customs seizes assets, they issue a notice of seizure. You have 30 days to respond. For someone who just fled a war zone, no legal representation, no knowledge of American administrative procedures, potentially no stable address. This 30-day window becomes practically unusable. Moreover, the burden of proof is on you. You need to prove that the seized assets are not connected to illegal activity. For someone who accumulated gold through 30 years of work and saving, but had to flee without access to bank records, purchase receipts, or official documentation, proving legitimate source becomes extremely difficult. The guidance that emerges from studying the experiences of refugees who successfully navigated this process is counterintuitive but consistent. Declare everything. Accept the friction and delays at the border. Do not attempt partial concealment, because discovery of any concealment destroys your credibility for the entire quantity. Carry whatever documentation you have. Invoices, receipts, certificates, everything. Partial documentation is better than none. If you're in a position to plan ahead, a more sophisticated approach is this. Enter initially without attempting to import large quantities, obtain residency, engage legal counsel, and then import metals through legal channels. This approach avoids the worst-case scenario, having your entire life savings seized at the first border crossing. Let me walk through something that almost nobody thinks about when precious metals are discussed as an emergency asset. A 1-ounce gold bar is worth approximately $4,300 at current market prices. If you're at a border checkpoint and a guard is asking for a passage fee, let's say the going rate is $300 to $500, offering an entire 1-ounce bar represents a massive overpayment, and there's no practical way to get change. A 1-ounce bar cannot be divided without specialized melting equipment. If you offer $4,300 worth of value for a $400 transaction, you've lost $3,900, and you can't negotiate your way out of it at a checkpoint. This is why denominations matter enormously, and why the Vietnamese Kim Thon protocol was so sophisticated. The optimal unit for operational use is the fractional bar. 1 gram of gold at current prices is worth approximately $140. It's small enough to use for specific one-time transactions, without complex negotiations or unacceptable overpayment. 5-gram bars at roughly $700 cover larger bribes and smuggler fees without representing catastrophic loss if seized. 10-gram bars at around $1,400 handle major transactions, crossing fees, document facilitation, significant border payments. Standard 1-ounce and larger bars are destination country assets. Used after arrival, in formal or semi-formal markets, to convert your accumulated wealth into local currency once you're somewhere stable. The operational logic of how you carry and deploy these denominations matters as much as having them. Distribute across your body instead of consolidating in one location. Money belt, pockets, clothing linings, separate packages at different points on your body. If any one point is discovered and seized, the rest survives. Expect 10 to 30% loss, losses to bribes, seizures, and theft at various stages of transit. Accumulate more than your target. Those who arrive with enough are those who started with more than they thought they'd need. Use small denominations in early stages of escape. Fuel, local guides, initial transport. Mid-range denominations for smuggler fees and border crossings. Large bars in the destination country for the first weeks before establishing financial infrastructure. I want to step back and explain the fundamental mechanism, because once you understand this, the entire cycle becomes crystal clear, and you'll see it in every collapse scenario you examine from now on. Gold communicates value without requiring any external authority to validate it. When a border guard encounters someone offering a gold coin, they don't need to call a bank. They don't need a functioning government. They don't need to check an exchange rate somewhere. They recognize gold, understand approximately what it's worth, and understand that this value will persist regardless of whatever happens to the regime they're currently serving. That last part is the critical element. A guard serving a regime that's losing a war will not accept that regime's currency in exchange for a significant service. Because if the regime appears to be completely collapsing, which is why you're trying to leave, that currency becomes paper. But gold transcends any particular regime. A Nazi official in the final days of World War II would refuse a suitcase full of Reichsmarks. That same official might accept gold, because they know gold maintains its value across regime changes. And the guard knows this too. A comment someone left on my previous video keeps running through my mind. My grandfather, who lived through 2 world wars in Germany, used to say you needed enough silver or gold coins to be able to bribe a guard. Your grandfather wasn't being pessimistic. He was describing the operational reality of what money actually is when the state becomes your enemy. What makes gold functional as a bribe is the certainty of its liquidity. A guard who accepts gold can walk into any gold buyer anywhere in the world and convert it to cash within hours. This convertibility is universally understood, and that's precisely what makes the transaction possible in the first place. So let me distill everything into something actionable. First, accumulate fractional gold now, not 1-ounce bars, 1 gram, 5 gram, 10 gram denominations. Continue with small quantities over years, without making large one-time purchases that create a financial record and a visible pattern. Second, distribute during transport, money belt, multiple pockets, clothing linings, separate packages at different points on your body. If any one point is discovered and seized, you haven't lost everything. Third, budget for loss. 10 to 30% of your total will go to bribes, seizures, and theft at various stages of transit. Accumulate above your target. Those who arrive with enough are those who started with more than they thought they'd need. Fourth, declare at the destination country border. Carry all the documentation you have. Purchase receipts, invoices, certificates of authenticity, assay certificates. Declare everything, except the friction. If you're carrying significant value, engaging legal counsel immediately after arrival is not optional. Fifth, understand what this is for. This is not a collapse spending strategy. This is not inflation hedging in a functioning economy. This is a very specific tool for a very specific scenario. When borders close, institutions collapse. When you need to move your accumulated life savings across a country border intact. Insurance for the worst-case scenario. Designed to never be used. Valuable precisely because it works in scenarios where nothing else does. If this forensic analysis changed the way you think about economic security, subscribe. Everything on this channel is based on documented historical cases, real data, real outcomes, real survivors. The cycle is not ambiguous. 1.5 million Vietnamese, millions of Jewish refugees throughout World War II, 1 million Syrians in 18 months, 5.8 million Ukrainians since February 2022. Same protocol, same asset class, same outcome. The question is never whether this cycle will repeat. The question is whether you'll position yourself in time, or whether you'll be standing at a closed border with $20,000 showing on your banking app, watching the person next to you with their deck of cards-sized package of gold leaves board the boat to safety. Pattern recognition isn't pessimism, it's preparation. The precedent isn't ambiguous, it's definitive.